who is a human rights lawyer, and Keisha Tobin, who is a barrister.
Mike. Good going, good going.
Keisha Tobin is a barrister at Olsen Chambers, who specializes in immigration and human rights law. And Geet is the author of this paper. I don't know whether he has circulated this. Yeah. So Keisha is going to do the oral presentation, but she will not be presenting the paper because she did not co-author the paper. So she will be doing her own presentation on the current issues faced by asylum seekers, importantly Tamil asylum seekers in the UK.
Thanks, Aaron. Can you hear me? Is that okay? So yeah, I'm going to speak just for, hopefully just for a few minutes about the trends in asylum and the issues facing Tamil asylum seekers here in the UK, and to touch briefly on the attitude that the UK Home Office and immigration courts have towards asylum seekers from Sri Lanka. And as Aaron said, you also have a much more detailed, much more thorough written document produced by Geet from Jane's Solicitors here for you to take home and read up on as well. And there's lots of food for thought for everybody in that as well, I'm sure. I know that there are probably some immigration lawyers here in the conference today, and probably some of you have your own personal direct experience of the UK asylum system. So forgive me if what I say is a little bit repetitive for you. But for the rest of you, I think it's helpful just at the outset to make clear what we mean when we refer to asylum seekers and refugees, because particularly at the moment, they are terms which are often conflated and can easily be confused with other terms. When we say asylum seeker, what we mean is somebody who has come, in our case, to the UK to seek international protection from persecution. We know that seeking asylum is a basic fundamental human right. Under the Refugee Convention and under British law, anybody is able to seek asylum and protection, and they're entitled to have that claim fully considered and decided. So there's no such thing as a bogus asylum seeker or an illegal asylum seeker. And when somebody has applied to have their claim considered and they've gone through the processes and have been found to have a genuine fear of return to their home country, then they can be given what we call refugee status, which means they have the legal protection that they're entitled to as a refugee. So that's a little bit of a distinction that I think is important to clarify. Here in the UK, Sri Lanka is one of the main countries from which asylum seekers originate here in the UK. There are a number of reasons for that, what we call push and pull factors. The push factor, of course, is the civil war and the continued persecution of a lot of people, particularly Tamils from the north and the east of Sri Lanka. But there's also the pull factor, which is, of course, on the one hand, the fact that the UK, for the most part, has a legal system which is reliable and transparent, and where human rights are generally regarded as deserving of significant protection. And the other issue that's a major pull factor is, of course, the fact that there is a substantial Sri Lankan diaspora here, a community that dates back decades to the 50s and 60s, which, of course, arises out of the close links between Sri Lanka and the UK and the colonial history that we've had over there. So those are the reasons why here in the UK, Sri Lankan asylum seekers make up a fairly substantial proportion of the overall asylum seeking population. Not in the top 5, particularly at the moment, given the conflicts in the Middle East. There are a lot of people from Syria, Afghanistan, Iran and Iraq, but Sri Lanka is still one of the major asylum seeking producing countries, if you can call it that. But contrary to what you might think, reading a lot of the broadsheet and tabloid newspapers here at the moment. The UK, it's relevant to note, actually takes less than the European Union average in terms of the number of asylum seekers per head of population. And it also is one of the countries in the EU with a lower than average acceptance rate, which means actually UK asylum law is quite stringent and quite difficult. And overall, because we have a relatively small population, and also because of where we're located geographically in terms of our relation to our European neighbours, the UK actually only receives about 3% of all of the total number of asylum seekers in the EU. And I think this is accurate, but I think at the moment around half of all asylum claims coming out of Sri Lanka tend to be successful ultimately, following initial applications here in the UK. And there is recognition by the UK Home Office and the courts that the Sri Lankan authorities do continue to persecute, that people are continuously arbitrarily detained if they are found or believed to have links to the LTT and similar organisations. That's in terms of Home Office policy, which is quite clear on that, and also in terms of the decisions that have come out of the courts. And what that means is that for a lot of asylum seekers from Sri Lanka, whether their case succeeds or not will come down to one of credibility, whether or not the Home Office or the courts believe what they're saying. And that's why it's incredibly important that people who claim asylum are able to access good legal representation and have lawyers who are willing and able to compile their cases thoroughly and prepare them thoroughly. And wherever possible, evidence that can back up claims that are being made needs to be submitted. Often in these sorts of asylum cases, we have expert reports which help, certainly to a significant extent. Medical reports can help if somebody is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, because of activities and harm that came to them before they came to the UK. And a common feature in Tamil asylum claims is the presence of scarring on people's bodies from past torture. In those sorts of cases, it's very important to get thorough, good scarring reports. And one thing that I think is particularly relevant to point out, if there are any people here in the audience who are involved in procuring those sorts of reports, is that it's important that those medical practitioners cover all bases and look at potential alternative causes as well, because you often find that it takes a little bit more than simply saying what an asylum seeker has said happened could have happened to persuade the courts and the Home Office. So it's important that any expert reports that are prepared are done thoroughly and that they consider alternative causation for traumatic psychological problems and also for scarring as well. The lead country guidance case, what we call the country guidance case, which is the lead case against which other asylum claims are considered, is a case called GJ, which dates back to 2013, which Aaron could actually tell you a lot more about because he was directly involved in that case. And that case changed the way that we look at the preparation of asylum appeals for Tamils. It's no longer necessary to go through a sort of tick box exercise to look at whether somebody satisfies a particular list of criteria to qualify for asylum, and it can now be addressed in a much broader way. There are 4 main categories of claimant that the courts found qualify for asylum and would be at risk if they were returned to Sri Lanka. The first is anybody who's seen as posing a threat to the integrity of Sri Lanka as a whole, as a unified state, and anybody who's been involved in Tamil separatism and similar issues from diaspora communities, particularly like here in the UK. And that's quite a broad brush category in some ways. I'll come on to some issues under that heading briefly in a moment. The second category of claim that the courts have said warrant a grant of refugee status is journalists and human rights activists who have been active in trying to highlight human rights abuses committed by the Sri Lankan authorities. Third category is people who have given evidence to the UN tribunals, the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Committees about war crimes committed by the Sri Lankan authorities during the Civil War. And the final broad category of claimant that the courts have said are deserving of a grant of refugee status are people who would appear on what's called a stop list, which is people who would be stopped on arrival at the airport in Sri Lanka because of a flag coming up on their name, basically when they go through passport control. And those people would be people against whom there are outstanding arrest warrants or against whom there are outstanding court orders. And so I'm just going to speak very briefly about some of the things which help in terms of evidencing claims under each of those headings, in case any of you are involved either directly in the preparation of these cases or through the diaspora organisations that you work with, you're asked to contribute somehow to somebody evidencing the claim that they have for refugee status. In terms of the diaspora activities in the UK, it's recognised that the Sri Lankan authorities have very sophisticated surveillance methods and that they do continue to monitor what happens in the Tamil diaspora communities. So that's something that's been confirmed and recognised by the Home Office as well in their most recent country report from, I think it was September this year. They confirmed that that's something that persists and is ongoing. So if somebody can demonstrate that they've been active in the diaspora community in promoting Tamil issues, particularly if they have links to the LTTE historically, that could be seen as potentially destabilising to the unity of Sri Lanka, then that's something that's important to put forward. And that's where a lot of your organisations come into play, because I know of many cases in which people have had letters or witness statements from the organisations that they volunteer for or are active within, and they can be very, very significant documents if they're put before an immigration tribunal. What I would say to those of you that are involved in writing those sorts of documents is it really is important that they're individualised, because the more common a template letter is, the less valuable it becomes in a claim. If the same letter is seen in application after application, individual appeal after individual appeal, it loses some of its worth. So if you're involved in writing letters of support for people to confirm the extent of their activities within your organisations, it would really help if you could specifically refer to them and specifically set out what exactly it is that they do to contribute to the work that your diaspora organisation does. And that can really make all of the difference. In terms of the journalists and human rights activists, I think that sort of speaks for themselves, presumably, again, evidencing the publications that have been produced by them are going to be crucial parts of their evidence. And in terms of people who have given evidence to the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Committee, the question for an immigration judge and indeed for the Home Office is going to be how the Sri Lankan authorities would know if somebody had given evidence against them to, particularly in respect of war crimes, for example, in the no-fire zone towards the end of the war in 2009. So that's something to bear in mind. How would the Sri Lankan authorities potentially know that this person was willing to give evidence of their activities in that regard? And so if you're from an organisation that's been involved in gathering information to use it as evidence of war crimes against the Sri Lankan authorities, that's something to bear in mind as well when you're putting together a letter of support for somebody in an asylum application. Turning then to people who might be on a stop list, people who'd be at risk of being arrested as soon as they arrive in Sri Lanka. Of course, it's helpful if you can provide copies of arrest warrants or court orders. And it's important, though, to bear in mind that the UK Home Office does conduct verification checks. And this is quite significant, and it also needs to be something that's looked into very carefully. Because the Home Office will go back, usually to the TID, the Terrorist Investigation Department, to check reference numbers and to see whether these arrest warrants and court orders really exist. They're supposed to be redacted for fairly obvious reasons. If they go back, if the Home Office is seen going to the Sri Lankan authorities, that's in itself potentially going to give rise to a further reason for somebody needing to be granted asylum, because that in itself could create problems for them. So those documents are supposed to be redacted and anonymized. But the difficulty then is if something is anonymized entirely, it loses its evidential benefit. So if you're involved in cases like that at all, it's very important to double check what exactly the Home Office has said to the Sri Lankan authorities, what information has been fed back, because it could be that there are real concerns for that person's safety arising out of that. Also begs the question of what benefit those background checks are going to be in any event, given the fact that the authorities and the police and the TID in Sri Lanka deny anyway that they're involved in persecuting people because of the activities that they've been involved in historically with the LTT. So given that those are activities that are likely to be denied anyway, the benefit of asking the Sri Lankan police to confirm the existence of those arrest warrants is a little bit perplexing. I think I'm just about out of time. Maybe I can just say one final thing before my 15 minutes is up. In terms of the...
also have an opportunity during
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll finish up with this point. There's been some change in approach since the elections in 2015, and it seems at the moment as though the UK Home Office is a little bit divided about how to look forward from here. Because on the one hand, as I said, you have a publication from this year which confirms that the authorities continue to survey people, Tamils in the north and in the east of the country. There's some suggestion in the Home Office documents that actually the risk for people in the diaspora could be even worse, because the focus now is on people who are here, who could be going back to try and fragment things. So on the one hand, you have Home Office recognition of that, but on the other hand, you do sometimes, it seems now, come across cases involving people who've had refugee status in the UK for about 5 years, who are then being told that because of the change in circumstances, it's now safe for them to return home. And in those cases, it's important to bear in mind that the onus is on the Home Office to prove that the situation is safe now. It's not on the refugee to reprove and re-demonstrate and re-argue their case. In fact, a reference has to be made to the UNHCR in each individual case where the UK government says it's now safe for someone who was already recognised as a refugee to go home. So that's something that will be interesting to watch in the coming months, to see how the government view on the new government and the stability of Sri Lanka develops in terms of the way asylum claims are decided. I think I'd better leave it there for now. Thank you.
Now I'd like to introduce Paul Satyanathan. He has been a refugee activist since 1985. He has associated himself with Refugee Council from the mid-80s. And since 1998, he has been a politician. And I think, if I'm correct, he's the first Tamil elected politician in the UK. So I asked him to talk about the second.
Good afternoon, everyone. bring the greetings from the Neham Council, European Tamils and asylum seekers and refugees, including the people, those who are deported. You may be thinking that why I'm wearing this one. I just wanted to wear for the beginning of this, my talk, because the asylum seekers, what she was talking about, the struggle to get the refugee status and then integration and stuff, that we can achieve this one. And this is not only for me, this is for the entire refugee population of this country. Because this is one of the things that we can achieve because the refugees can contribute, and especially the Sri Lankan refugees. So thank you for that one. I was asked to talk about diaspora. So I started to talk about the diaspora, or started to write, and I ended up with 12 pages. And I heard the definition for diaspora in the morning, and then talking about various aspects of the international dimension and the roles and stuff. But who are we as the diaspora in this country or wherever we live? What is our roles and responsibilities? What we engage, what we do is one of the key questions. So to me, the key word is diaspora is not a threat. Diaspora is an asset. Diaspora has two powers. One is an intellectual power, the other one is an economic power. So I said this one in May when we had another conference in Sri Lanka. The diaspora word is a bit of contentious, so therefore they are not using the word diaspora. They are coming to a term called Sri Lankans abroad. So to me, it doesn't matter. As long as I work for peace building thing, I accept any names. So I went for a conference called Roadmap for Sri Lankans Abroad. So one of the clear things what I said is that the diaspora is an asset. Because there were 6 countries to part, we wanted to rebuild and then to see how best they can understand us as a diaspora community who comes with the kind of intellectual power. What I say is intellectual power is the first generation, second generation, third generation who has achieved wider knowledge. They have gained up to PhD, research and various things. We are very proud about our younger generation because if we don't acknowledge that, I think we will be failed. Because I always believe that when I am alive, only that we should appreciate the people and recognize and value them. Not after they are dead and gone, having lavish memorial service and line up and put garlands and talking about them. Our children, our second generation who has gone up to Africa, Latin America, Europe and various places, they need to be exposed, they need to learn, they need to contribute, they have achieved many things. Now the window has been opened to go back to their motherland. Or some of the children may be born there and brought up here, or some of them are born here. So they have to go back and help their grandparents' motherland or roots to see how best they can actively get involved. One of the key things is the children of that land should grow with the hope of peace. Whatever politics we talk, I'm not interested because I do understand one thing, that there should be a political settlement for the Tamils. There's no question on that. There's no doubt on that. We need to sort that one out. But if you talk about only on the politics, then we will be losing the other aspects. We have a moral duty to help those children and rebuild that land. There are many issues, many areas that we can talk about. Economic power. If you talk about economic power, if I take, for example, the Sinhalese, those who are in Italy, they can't, even in my humble opinion, they can't go and build a small village there. Or in the Muslims, they may not have that capacity. But the Tamils have the capacity across the world. I'm not saying that Sri Lanka is bankrupt, or they don't have the means to survive. The cake is already there, but as a diaspora, we go as a kind of a icing top of that. So we have that kind of a key 2 things, economic power and the intellectual power, where we can able to share the knowledge, technical expertise, right? This is what they want, right? So this is how we can able to rebuild. But then again, when I look at the whole diaspora aspect, I've come up with 13 subtitles of intellectual power, economic power, Tamil diaspora, politics in UK, diaspora and charity, fundraising, faith in diaspora, cultural identity in diaspora, sports in diaspora, the women in diaspora, the young people in diaspora, the media role in diaspora, and then I came up with 30 odd recommendations. I warmly welcome for people to criticize or analyze or even in recognizing these things, because this is my personal humble opinion for the last 32 years in public life, what I've seen. I wanted to share the things is important for us to recognize where we achieved, where we failed. What are the gaps, how best we can able to rebuild that land as well as us here. When we talk about the peace, somebody asked what is peace. To me, personal peace within myself is important, peace with my neighbor is important, peace with my community or my enemy is important. Because as long as I'm alive, I wanted to do that one, because after I'm gone, I can't able to sit and speak from here, right? So on that theme, that there are many issues. So